Hello, and welcome to the Sea of Thieves Hot Topics podcast. I'm not John, I'm Christina. John is with us in spirit. He's in Mexico on holiday, but we've trapped his spirit in this lovely little skull here. So he is joining us somehow, somewhere. I'm joined by these lovely people who I'll let introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Drew Stevens, senior producer on Sea of Thieves.
I'm Joni, executive producer on Sea of Thieves.
And I'm Mike Chapman, creative director on Sea of Thieves.
Lovely. That's very funny. You enjoyed saying that. You just had a little laugh. Now, Drew, you've not been on the podcast since something else very funny happened.
Yeah, it was a bit of a crazy scenario. It's unsurprising that both John and Antonio, neither of them are here today, because the last time I was on, last time I was in front of the camera was when John had an unfortunate accident with a monkey.
For those that haven't seen it, it's not that bad.
It's fine.
Your reaction is priceless, though.
Yeah,
Continues to be priceless.
The monkey was sick on him. So the monkey had who had the unfortunate accident? I guess John was the recipient of it.
He was.
Yeah.
He was.
But Antonio's fine. Not sure about John. But,
Scarred for life.
But, yeah. But welcome back.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. So before we get into everything, how are we all? How are we doing? It's been a while since we last had our podcast, so...
Good. Really good. Like, really, yeah. We were just saying how amazing it is to be back in the studio, to actually record podcast back in the Tavern. It's awesome. But, yeah, very excited for 2022, as people have seen, with the preview event for this year and all the plans that we've got. And even on top of that, the plans that we've got for our seasons. So lots of exciting content to come, lots of pieces that have fallen into place. So, yeah, very excited for this year.
No, it's good. I was so excited because we were able to share a roadmap for like the first time and feel really good about where it's going. And obviously there are little hints as to what's coming for later on in the year. But it was an amazing moment to just be like, yeah, we're here. This is the plan. Look forward to it.
And that was you pushing us to do that as well, wasn't it? Pushing us to share the roadmap. Like it's not a comfortable thing for a development team to do, to share a roadmap with anyone, is it? Let alone players.
But it's fine because you had several terrible iterations via PowerPoint, which you could just shuffle, approve, say no, thank you. So we got there in the end, but it was so worthwhile because I think it gives our players so much, hopefully, confidence and excitement about what we're about to head into. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think we had fun with trying to give some little teases, but not giving too much away. And it's been good to see the discussion of what people think are coming through season 7, 8, and 9. But yeah, there's definitely some stuff in there that I think will surprise people, but hopefully make them really happy. Some community requested features in there that will finally see the light of day. So very excited. Very excited.
Sea of Thieves.
There we go.
What's that? Does that classify? Does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
How are you doing? It's been a while since you've been on. What's been up?
I've slowly but surely got parts of my body tattooed since we've last been in the studio, so that was my kind of pandemic present to myself. So slowly but surely adorning my body with tattoos. So it's also been a nice stress relief while I've been out. So I can sit at home and do some work, and then also sit in a chair and just get an aggressive amount of tattoo inking done. So.
I like that. I had a tattoo of the pandemic as well of my cat.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But it's
That is cool.
Look at it. It actually looks like him with a little tatty ear and everything. But no, not as aggressive as that, which is quite impressive. It's very nice.
Yeah, I've got my legs in progress as well, so
Very
I'm
good.
not going to get my legs out on the podcast. So.
Disappointing.
Not till the second half.
Next time.
Yeah.
If you'd like to see his legs, drop it in the comments. And we can peer pressure. It's not a problem. It's all good.
You've got the roadmap on your back as well.
Lots of crossing out.
Okay, so I think first up, the thing we wanted to cover first, because it seems like it's quite close to when this podcast will be releasing, are kind of, let's talk about live service issues and the hurdles that we've hit. Joe, I know that you've been talking with our technical team, our technical director. Kick us off.
So basically, I'll kind of go back in time, like come with me back in time. Ooh, and I want an effect for that. One of those little wavy ones, isn't it? I think that's the one. But so if we head back towards,
It's a great start. This is a great start. This is brilliant, John. You see what's happened? You leave, and this happens.
Indeed. But so we head back before A Pirate's Life. Like we knew heading towards A Pirate's Life, which was June last year. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Like we knew that was going to be a huge moment for Sea of Thieves and was likely to be our biggest moment since the original launch in terms of players coming into the game and the amount coming in at the same time. And so we worked really, really hard to kind of go, how do we scale our services and how do we actually make it so that regardless, almost how do we remove any kind of limitation for if we have a huge moment for Sea of Thieves, we want to just be able to cope, right? And you see it with, with the launch of Sea of Thieves, when we had a huge amount of people coming in, we had some challenges with kind of just coping with that amount of kind of activity and the messages going backwards and forwards and the way our services kind of connect to the game and vice versa. And so, and it's not uncommon with live service games, right? That can be an issue, right? You see it especially around the launch of something, and the launch of something big when you have lots of people coming in. So for A Pirate's Life, we worked super hard to kind of remove that as a barrier to us going and doing cool things where we want to bring loads of people into the game, right? So what played out with A Pirate's Life was really good. Like, so the launch of that, it broadly worked without kind of any issues around scale, and we hit the highest number of concurrent players we had seen since the launch period of Sea of Thieves, which was awesome. And so that was great. That was a great moment. But kind of since then, we've been working on kind of like split across two kind of areas really as a kind of services team. And some of that is with new features that we go and work on, they generally have a service kind of requirement, right? And so everything we think about, we're looking at, okay, what stuff needs to be controllable or editable in a service as opposed to what is in kind of the game client and things. And so that's one thread where we're continuing to do new things. And obviously that's change, right? And it means change happens in the game. And then at the same time, your kind of focus is on keeping the live game maintained, keeping everything working and making sure that the issues aren't kind of surfacing. And so our team's been kind of split across both of those things, and there's just been a little bit of a conflict. And how that has kind of played out is that as we've pursued new features, new things that we want to go do, which we're going to always keep doing for Sea of Thieves, that we haven't managed to kind of almost have that early enough tell when things have started to maybe decay or things have started to, because of some work in a completely separate area, something kind of changes here, or even something might change in a partner service that we're using, because we have loads of different services that we use, that kind of flow in and out of Sea of Thieves. Something might change somewhere else that starts to affect something on our side, and we haven't spotted that early enough because it's maybe happened and not affected the game and not affected the players. So fast forward to kind of community day, and what played out there was, it was an amazing day, amazing kind of moment, right, of everyone sharing stories and of driving that multiplayer up. And that drove loads of people to come into Sea of Thieves at the same time. And so that kind of replicated a kind of similar spike to what we saw back at A Pirate's Life, right, in terms of this huge increase in concurrency. And so at that point, those little things that had been kind of decaying or going wrong, kind of either in partner services or in our own stuff, suddenly kind of rose to the fore, and it just culminated in us not being able to get as many people in as we wanted at the kind of same time. So about 2 p.m, I think it was, UK time on the Sunday. And so we've been working since then to kind of identify what are those things that have gone wrong, how do we address those, and so there's been that kind of short-term thing of okay, we need to fix this, we need to kind of address that. But now that there's been a kind of retrospective this week to figure that out. And that's where we've really identified this, okay, there were these tells, these things we could have identified. And we've really had that open discussion around, okay, we need to not just kind of have one team that has this split focus of kind of continuing to evolve while also maintaining. We're looking at spinning up a second kind of team that is going to be completely maintaining live operations, and their focus is going to be, one, identifying those things that they do just happen. Like I say, it could be in our services, it could be in partner stuff, but we can, we want to be able to identify them early so that we can address them before they become a player-facing impact. And also, if something does get through that and becomes something where we do have a player-facing impact, because, let's say one of our services goes down for whatever reason, or a partner service goes down, that we want to be able to kind of insulate ourselves. So if something like that happens, that we can switch it off, or we have a kind of a backup for that specific instance, so that we're protecting ourselves for something within the game experience that would be affected. So we've kind of got two focuses, and so having one team that's specifically at those kind of two strategic goals, whilst we have the kind of existing team continue to work on evolving new features, new mechanics, new things like that. That's kind of where we're at. And so there's kind of, definitely the highs of A Pirate's Life, and then we've just had some kind of just stuff that's been kind of bubbling under and going wrong occasionally and things. And that will surface with players as either login issues or lost progress in game, right? And those are kind of the two main challenges that we see. And so, our intent is absolutely to protect the kind of Sea of Thieves experience and the lived experience for players from those two things, and kind of get the reliability up to as high as possible as we can on both of those kind of threads. But ultimately it means scaling our team and allowing them to have the split focus to do that, as opposed to kind of having to deal with the conflicting priorities that we have been. So
more of an ability to assess where we're at before we hit scale, right? That's what you're saying.
Definitely, yeah. Let's not be surprised, right? And let's spot those things going wrong before they become a player-facing impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes without saying that, like, Community Day is my recent example, but even like a few weeks before that, I think it goes without saying everyone on the team is as disappointed as the players trying to get in. I mean, it's there's that sense of anxiety of, are we going to hit issues? It feels like there's a blind spot there. But I think, everything you've just spoke about allows us to identify and track those things early and know exactly where we stand with the health of our service, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like the integrity of the lived experience, right? Like, if we want people to be able to get in, obviously, and then, but once you're in, like, that's the key. We should, progress should be earned. There shouldn't be delays. Like, all of those things that, like, we've seen kind of play out. Like you say, there was, like, early January was one where we had some lost progress and things. Was a really notable one. So. Like, absolutely, like, from we know that experience needs to be kind of higher, and this, like, the most recent Community Day one, Gasly gave us some really good insights into that, building on stuff that we've been learning since January too, and things, and through the last year. But so I feel good about kind of now we've identified that and where we're heading and how we're moving forward, and obviously the proof will be as we go and iterate, and like, you should be able to see that kind of meaningful improvement and impact. So.
No, I think on Community Day, like you say, it disappoints all of us. Like, we're really hoping for this amazing player moment where all of our players would just pile in, like, tweet about it, increase the multiplier, and have a really lovely time. And we saw those amazing stories being shared, which is, the whole point of it is to share those stories as well as get the in-game benefit, right? So that was a really lovely moment, but it was really hard for my team to some extent, because obviously this project was sort of our baby, and we were on the front line of those who were, really frustrated about the fact they couldn't get in. So it was really hard, but I think everyone in the team took it just as hard, just to be like, we had an amazing moment here, we just weren't able to fit everyone through the door. So for future events, obviously, this was the first of its nature as well. We know a little bit more what to expect. We know how to brace for impact, and like you say, with the split focus, at least we have an understanding of, okay, this actually needs some people looking after it a little bit more, or a little bit more focused, rather than juggling all these different things as we try to launch new content, to be able to deliver it and feel comfortable. So when we say, look, Season 6's Community Day is coming here, we're ready for you, we can say it with full confidence, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting as well, because if you think of A Pirate's Life, like, we clearly identified that as a massive moment, and the Community Day was awesome, but we weren't, like, as a plan and idea, and we were all, like, really excited about it, but I don't think any of us expected the scale of kind of players pouring into the game as a result of this. And so it created one of those spikes, which I think, like, again, if we step back and go, like, now, or we can step forward to the next Community Day, but that's the effect. But now we're much more prepared, like, for things that where we might have a spike like that, and so we can kind of really be robust in terms of how we're preparing for it and how we're kind of, like, preparing for that kind of thing. So, like, our risk kind of assessment of something is going to be a bit different going forward with one of those than maybe it was kind of leading up to this, right? And that's a great thing on one hand, because it's obviously really popular, and it, like, people really enjoyed it, but it was, like you say, tinged with the kind of the regret that it didn't get to be as big as it could be and be enjoyed by everyone as we wanted. But it was still I love the idea. I love that it came from your team and everyone within team. I think that's amazing, to such a cool thing to celebrate the community and players. And so next time we do that, we're going to be kind of we get to be much better prepared, right, heading in. So
and we do get to do it again, because I made everyone put it on the roadmap. So committed.
That is true.
What a blessing. We love that roadmap.
And I think we can console ourselves with, to take some positive out of it. I think that day was to watch it unfold, particularly in the morning, the stories that were shared, just how that mechanically worked, and just the wealth of stories just in the game and outside of the game, just seeing the community's creativity. Like, I just sat back, and I knew Community Day was coming and I knew what the meaning was, but to just see it play out and the success that it kind of reached was incredible.
It just blew us out the water. Like, with not just with the concurrency, but with just the stories that they had to share. And they weren't just like, I sailed and had a lovely time. There were some people there, but there were people who just planned entire streams around it, done entire kind of video projects, had coordinated on a server with their friends to do something special. Like, it really felt like it was a moment that brought everyone together. And the culture that Sea of Thieves has created was kind of crystallised in that one day. So hopefully we can, do bigger, better next time. But it took us all by surprise just how much everyone got behind it, which is amazing.
Yeah. But you're right, and it's funny, isn't it? We talk about the Sea of Thieves community. We talk about it being such an amazing place, right, and such a welcoming place, and so supportive and of us as a team and everything. But so maybe with hindsight, we should have kind of known and predicted it was going to be so kind of big and wholesome and amazing. But but it is. It's the best of everything about Sea of Thieves, right? As a shared world, as a multiplayer thing, as a community, as a place for people to share stories and have amazing memories and stuff. So like magic.
And I think at the very least, it's thrown a lens onto all the stuff that you've talked about, right? In terms of exposing where we've got limitations with their live service and all the improvements you've just gone through. So there's that to take away as well. Like, always improving, always assessing, always moving forward. So
it's that challenge, isn't it? We're always going to have the scenario where we want to move the game forward meaningfully, and trying to put the resources in the right place to invest in that and keep moving the game forward, but keep recognising that there are players playing right now as we're recording, and making sure that we find the way to prioritise both new and exciting experiences, but also keep the game stable and keep the game in a great experience right now for players. It's always going to be a balancing act as we go through our live service.
Yeah. Talking about core game experiences. You like that, didn't you?
I did like that.
I'll wink to the camera. I struggled with my mouth then as well, so that looked a bit funny. But I gave it a go. Talking of core game experiences, Drew, one of the things that you're here to talk about is, I'm going to say it, hit registration.
You don't know how, like, deep inside I get like an intense fight or flight response whenever anybody ever says hit registration. I think I basically make that face, but internally. Hit registration is a challenge and has been a challenge for players for a fair amount of time, and I think that's why we wanted to try and hit it in one of our Hot Topics podcasts, that it is a point of contention and a point of sentiment around our players. So wanted to try and give a bit of context as to why hit registration is a challenge on Sea of Thieves, and then some of the steps that the team are taking to try and improve it. So firstly, hit registration is hard.
Yep.
We have a very challenging scenario where effectively we've got multiple floating objects in a physics world, and those floating objects make it incredibly difficult, not only for the server to manage all of these floating things, and when I say floating things, I mean ships and barrels and rowboats and all of the complexity that a sea brings, but throwing combat into that, and ranged combat specifically, makes it a real challenge for the server to be able to calculate the various different things that are going on. And one of the challenges that comes out of that is effectively you've got multiple floating objects, and we've got a gunplay system that is about bullets that travel in real time. So it's something that we can talk about a little later, between the difference between various different like combat systems. But Sea of Thieves is a very traditional gunplay experience, in trying to tap into that pirate experience, right, of a slow-moving bullet that you see arc over a long period of time and fall. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of the origins of why we made that kind of design decision.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the approach, before launch, while we were prototyping, the approach we applied to combat was very much like the rest of our mechanics in the game. How can we immerse you in this pirate world? So, hence first-person perspective, hence what you'd expect to be weaponry in a pirate world. So both in terms of the ammo counts of the weapons, both in terms of how they perform when you're firing them. And I think that feeling of bullets travelling through the air and the natural fall off that you'd expect, and the fact that these aren't high caliber weaponry, this is kind of old 17th century weaponry, that was a big thing for us in terms of getting it right, and also kind of making it feel like a Sea of Thieves mechanic. So in many ways, I think everything you've just said in mind, I think we've added to that challenge by not making it easy for ourselves, because we've gone all in on this idea of bullets having a time of flight in the air like you'd expect in real life. And there's a natural almost calibration you go through as a player to kind of work out the drop off of the shot, the distance of the shot, so that it's actually quite complex in terms of what it's doing. And then when you play that out on a server with messages, that's where you get the inaccuracy, right?
Yeah, effectively, we've got that very complicated gunplay scenario of bullets traveling over real time, but then we've got these two floating physics objects, and it's not just making it that gunplay hit registration is only a challenge on water. We do have a general hit registration challenge across the game in its entirety, but it's generally that other games don't have to deal with floating objects and physics being calculated at all times.
Yep.
So it's very much a challenge that we see across a lot of experiences, but gunplay on ships is definitely a challenge for the system. And to your point, like, we've made it difficult for ourselves. We've made sure that we've optimized for the type of experience and the type of gunplay we want players to have. And we're slowly learning that actually behind the scenes, that gives us a real challenge to try and twist and optimize for performance instead, and try and optimize for accuracy. So that is a state of play around why hit reg is hard, and maybe a bit of a behind the scenes as to why it's taken so long for us to try and work out how we go and improve that scenario while protecting the gunplay experience. But the team's focus at the moment is to very much try and double down on the foundations around the system. So really trying to look at areas where the server is trying to calculate these shots that happen between ships, or long distance shots that have this time of flight bullet, and trying to optimize those scenarios. So we've had fixes coming in over the smaller monthly updates to try and almost make some experiments of going, what if we tweak this system and improve the speed of how bullets are detected between ships, or improve the how gravity is calculated. So I'm getting into a bit of the weeds, but basically we've been trying to improve parts and almost optimize part of that experience about how the server calculates those bullets. And it's very much a foundational system. And like we can talk a little bit later about server performance, but we are in a place at the moment where our servers are underperforming where we'd like them to be. And even though players might see that as like actions failing to happen when you scoop a bucket, or maybe rub it like a bottlenecking and players being dragged back, small impacts to server performance can have a hit registration impact. So it's not just a focus around hit registration, it's actually just general server performance can also push us into a problem place from hit registration. But moving past those almost like small experiments and trying to identify key bugs in the system, one of the next steps that we're looking internally to very much focus our testing time on is a fundamental change to gunplay behind the scenes. And that is shifting ranged weapons from a projectile-based system over to something called hit scan. And hit scan is well known in competitive shooting terms, is a way for it to very much optimize for accuracy. It's very much that you point a gun at someone and target it, and the server will draw a line to it and say, did you hit that target or did you not hit that target? Which is very different to us physically tracking this bullet through the real world and seeing where it hits. That is quite a sizable change, as you can imagine, a fundamental change to the gunplay. And that is something that we're going through internal testing at the moment. But realistically, the challenge that we have is that a change like that is going to fundamentally change the feel and the experience of gunplay. It's no longer going to feel like a slow projectile with an arcing drop off. There's going to be compromises to the gunplay experience in order for us to really push from a experience and of pirate lore and gunplay over to a more performance system. But yeah, it's a very fundamental change, but it's in internal testing at the moment. It looks promising, but that's going to be something that we're going to want incredible amounts of insiders testing time on, both to just make sure that we don't push too far and end up with incredibly performant system that just feels like we're firing railgun shots in Sea of Thieves, and we're clearly going to protect against that experience. But it's going to take a lot of testing time for us to go through that. But at the moment, it feels positive.
No, it does. I mean, something to acknowledge is the fact that there's less surety that your shot is going to hit through that time of flight projectile. That is almost the leveling of the playing field in an environment where you're playing with crossplay, where you've got players playing on keyboard and mouse against players playing on controller. The fact that both sets of players are trying to land their shots, calibrating against the distance of the shot, the fact that there are these moving objects. I mean, that is a big part of leveling the playing field. So what Drew is talking about, there's like statistically how it's improved, but there's also what does it feel like. So I think in those early tests, getting hands-on with this change, you do feel some benefits straight away in terms of how reliable your shots are. I think that the issue then is, how does this work in Sea of Thieves? How does this not feel like I've got this ability to fire a laser across like 3 miles across the server? So there's a lot. It's very early, and there'll be a lot of work to do in terms of how we make that mechanic feel at home in Sea of Thieves, alongside just general testing of whether is this hit scan approach right for Sea of Thieves. But early tests are promising. We're doing some work at the moment to get into it, just presentationally improve it, and then we'll continue to assess. And as Drew says, it'll need to spend a lot of time with our insiders and get their feedback, both on the feel and feedback around how it improves the perception of hit reg and all of that.
And regardless of which way that kind of ends up, right? If that ends up being the approach that we take with this, right, that's going to be a change, and that's going to be a tough decision, because it's going to be, for want of a better word, a compromise, right? It's going to be a compromise between like the experiential goals versus the reliability of it, right? And if we think about when we've made changes to Sea of Thieves before, but that change fundamentally how it feels, like that is going to be something that people are going to kind of, if we like, we're going to have a moment where it's going to be something to get used to adjust to again, and it's going to. We know that, hey, it's a big change and it's going to be controversial, and there will be feedback, right? But
like you're describing a designer's worst nightmare at the moment. It's anything that affects that core muscle memory of core game feel. Anything that changes there, even if it is for the better, and that's clearly communicated, it's a big impact to our players. So it's something we're stepping through very methodically, getting different viewpoints. Eventually we'll have a solution, whether it's that one or a variation of that will hit insiders. But yeah, we're on that journey, but yeah, we're just getting started, and signs are promising, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, which is why we wanted to talk about it openly here, right? And like literally, like let's get prepared for kind of this change is coming. We want to test it. We want to get feedback. We want to see. But it is, I suspect, not going to like be a unanimous decision or a decision thing where like everyone in insiders will be like, yes, make this change, right? So, like, but and like that's the kind of change it is, right? But if we think it overall leads to a better experience for Sea of Thieves, then we'll make the call, right?
Yeah. I mean, there is a broader point that I think is worth acknowledging in terms of how combat sits in the Sea of Thieves experience. I think, and we agree. We see the feedback from our players in terms of, when you think about Sea of Thieves, what are some of those beloved mechanics? So the way that ship combat works, the way that some of the personal tools work and how the items work. But we know that combat is not one of our strong areas. And I think we've been making this game for several years. We've learned a lot. And nothing beats getting the game in the hands of players and seeing how they relate to the experience. And I think that the difference is, and this is something we now take very much to heart, is we approached all the mechanics in Sea of Thieves clearly with trying to make them feel at home in this pirate sandbox. They are there to immerse you. Not any of these mechanics are particularly deep, but the depth of the game comes from how these mechanics interact together in the sandbox. And I think before launch, we wouldn't describe ourselves as we're a combat game. We'd say we're a pirate adventure game where combat can happen. Where I think what we've learned and what our community have taught us, that we can now take to heart, is if you put any kind of competitive combat in a game, you're a combat game. And you need to take that very seriously in terms of where it sits in the experience, how you maintain, how it stays robust, how you iterate on it, listen to feedback. And I think we have been for a while, and everything Drew says is absolutely spot on. We've got that in mind, but we are moving in the right direction. But yeah, it's just a bit of a a realisation, and just want to acknowledge that the way we think about combat in Sea of Thieves is with taking it much more seriously in terms of where it ranks alongside other mechanics.
I think it also explains why it's been quite a lot of behind the scenes work.
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
that we're not making very clear player-facing changes and iterating in that space. We're very much going behind the scenes and going, we acknowledge that this is a fundamental point in Sea of Thieves where we're struggling in terms of hit registration in retail, and going, fundamental changes are going to take time, and we need to make sure that those are measured changes, and they've gone through a rigorous testing phase to not only validate they work as we expect them to, but that they feel right. So we're going to make sure that we get the time to be able to go through that.
Nice. And if you're interested on testing this when it eventually arrives to insiders, go to seaofthieves.com/insider and you'll be able to sign up. Everything that you that you kind of play though over there is behind an NDA though, so but it will be arriving at some point. We can say that with some confidence,
Yes,
right? That we'll be getting these improvements out. Next up, and this is a less smooth segue. You touched on something that is quite key to, I think, a lot of the feedback that we've received quite recently, and that's kind of server performance, specifically with regards to how many ships we have on a server and how many players we might have on a server as well. We've obviously made some recent changes in that particular area. So I think kind of you just provided quite a lot of context on server performance there. But I think it's probably quite nice for us to touch upon that now, because we know that when you go back to those players who you say, it's not a combat game, it's a game with combat in it. For some people, they play it for combat, and they're finding that they can only find 4 of the ships rather than 5. So I think it's probably quite key we cover that.
Yeah. So let me talk a bit about the state of play. So back end of last year, we saw some server performance regressions around season 4 time, and that was just a general regression in server performance, and that can cause delayed actions. It can cause clearly an impact on hit registration, and we kind of took ourselves back and said, right, we need to try and assess where these issues came from, and we tried to work through to identify where those performance issues came from, and tried to then start to put some actions and plans in place. We delivered some improvements in November and December's update, and then again in January's update, and we're not quite there yet, but January's update did give us a new tool set, and it was a new capability to not only just be able to change the amount of crews on a server, which is quite a crude lever to pull when we know there's such a significant impact to the experience by changing just from 6 crews to 5 crews. We know that has a material impact on the encounters between players and the frequency of encounters. But if the server performance dropped to a certain level that we're monitoring, we have to make that decision and unfortunately pull that emergency ripcord and say we need to be able to reduce the amount of crews on the server in order for the players that are on the server to have a good enough experience. We made that decision towards the end of last year that we were going to take that step back from 6 crews down to 5 crews. But January's update gave us a new tool to be able to measure that, to configure that in a different way. Instead of just being able to say measure the number of crews on a server, we can actually give it a couple of different configurations and say, give us 6 crews, but also give us a cap of how many players are on it. So instead of just going, we're going to move from 6 galleons down to 5 galleons on a server, we could give it an opportunity to fill out 6 crews, but only up to 16 players. So it will go, I can only have 1 galleon on that server. I can bring a brig in and bring a sloop in. And that change came with a couple of performance optimizations as well. So as part of January's update, we were really excited to see how not only the improvements that we'd made in the system, but this new tool set could come in. And our goal was to return to 6 ships and then slowly increase the dial and push ourselves from 16 players to 17 and 18. Yep. So that was our goal going in. Unfortunately, when we launched January's update, we saw that just switching to six crews and that 16 player limit, the performance wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. And we were back in a state for the first 24 hours where we were uncomfortable. And we said, we're going to have to make the difficult decision. We'll leave ourselves at 16 players, but we're going to bring the crews back to 5. Now, that is not a great experience. We recognise that we're still today in that state of operating with 5 crews on the server. We do have further work going on behind the scenes to further improve performance. So we've got some performance improvements coming in February and March's updates. So we've got those going through testing and going through insiders at the moment. But we are also working behind the scenes on something a bit more experimental, which is effectively a server architecture, like hardware change. And that is in the February to March timescale that we're going to look to try and get that through into testing. And that looks at the moment that could give us some sizable performance improvements. So we've got a combination of things going through the roadmap at the moment, which can give us some performance improvements, a potentially experimental one that we might choose not to change. But then realistically, our goal through the set of changes is to return to 6 crews and get that player encounter rate the way we want it, but then slowly increase the amount of players on a server, so that we can get that. We want to try and provide enough ship combinations as possible. Yep. So really try and tweak the combinations when we're live in retail, and we can monitor performance, we can monitor the amount of crews available and the amount of players available, and make sure that we get as many players on a server as possible within that 6 crew limit.
That is the optimal Sea of Thieves experience that we designed our world for. It's not about 7 ships or 8 ships. It was always around 6 ships for that average rate of encounter. And even if you're not the type of player who's motivated by getting into ship battles and combat, but you're just an adventurer, you just want to go and do those quests in the world, that is as important to us. That's the way we designed Sea of Thieves. So yeah, everything around our world and the amount of outposts and the size of our world was around that 6 ship limit. So that is where we want to get back to. And to Drew's point, with that increasing player number as well, because we don't just want to have a server of 6 sloops or 5 sloops and a galleon. It's about having a mix of ships to give you those variety of experiences.
I mean, that was some of the initial feedback we had, wasn't it? When we had that player cap, people all of a sudden did the maths. I'm not going to do the maths because I'll struggle to count while there are 2 cameras on me. But they were like, right, okay, actually, well, the question was, a galleon's going to be OP over in this server because we've done the maths and there's a galleon and we've only got this amount of players and a cap and there's 5 ships. So it is just working out what's the best experience for right now, and then also, how do we optimize for that 6 ships on a server with any kind of configuration of ship sizes, right?
Yeah, and I think ships are one of the most expensive components, elements in the game. Like, what we don't want to do is go switch off parts of the world or switch off other mechanics. Like the ship itself in Sea of Thieves, and I apologise if people have heard me talk about this before. Like, it's not just a vehicle in the sense of you'd experience it in another game. Each ship is like a level. It's that expensive in terms of.
I thought he was going to go full Jack Sparrow then.
Ship is freedom. Freedom to have your adventures with 5 other ships in the world, having an average rate of encounter as part of an eternal pirate life.
Did Jack Sparrow ever say a ship is not a vehicle?
I don't think he used the word vehicle.
No.
I've got to be honest. And now it felt weird when I said it, and you called it out, which makes it feel doubly weird.
Good.
So thanks for that. Yeah, that was.
I'm going to put that in the next press release. Mike Chapman, creative director. A ship is not a vehicle.
is not a
Just
vehicle.
Not a
no
vehicle.
context. Just leave it there.
Great.
But it's it's really interesting because and this is where you can cut this out if you need to.
We'll be right back with the Sea of Thieves podcast.
We did cut that bit.
It's gone. You'll never know what it is. Sorry. Oh well. Moving on. So
Can't believe you said that.
I'm so sorry, Drew. But so when we're talking about hit reg, obviously you're talking about the foundations of combat and the PvP experience. But obviously there aren't just the foundational elements. There are the things that we bolt on top of that as well when we talk about things like weapon balancing. So we get people talk about this a lot. I know it's one thing that, in terms of the meta, that people discuss quite frequently. We see Reddit threads all over the place, forum threads, etc. So things like one-shot blunderbussing and the fact there are 5 bullets in a gun. Like, where are we at with that? Is that something we want to consider evolving, or are we just trying to get those foundational bits right before we then move into, okay, well, what does this mean for the rest of it?
Very much so. So yeah, we see a range of feedback around just combat balancing. At the moment, there's a very strong push towards sword combat and sword combat balancing, and some just frustrations about the fundamental system about sword combat. But really, where we are from a managing server performance with a focus on hit registration and gunplay, we're very much in a place of we're not going to make any changes to the combat balancing, whether it's focusing on a specific type like sword combat or just the interplay between weapons. We're going to focus very much on let's get our server performance into a better state, let's get hit registration into a better state so we can better establish a baseline of how the game is operating. And then we'll take that next step of saying pretty much sword combat is the next thing to go and focus on, and we'll try and work out what are the right steps to go and take to, and realistically it's tweaking the experience. It's making the sword combat feel the way that it should. We don't expect to be in a scenario where players can't rely on the block. We want to make sure that sword play feels well presented and operating the way that we expect. But it's very much tweaking the tools and the system that we've got available.
That, make sure that foundation is strong first, and that's the stage that we're in, right, which is trying to solidify the foundations of this combat experience to make sure it's reliable and robust in all of these different scenarios you can get into in Sea of Thieves. And then it's not even revisiting balance that we've considered in the past. I think it's very much just a fresh look at balancing of the weapons and how they relate to each other for Sea of Thieves and 2022 and the game it represents today. So I think that fresh look at combat balancing, it really needs those strong foundations first, that's where we're dedicating our efforts right now.
I like you're nodding. Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
I agree.
And I'm going to apologise now, but this is all the stuff that we see come up on our channel. So I know it's quite difficult to have conversations around some of this stuff, especially when it comes at you as a surprise. It's not a surprise. They know in advance that this is coming. But one of the things that we do see, like I think, and this goes back to kind of hit registration and combat, is that we see people saying this person's cheating. And they might not be cheating. It might just be because of the experience that we've been able to provide. It's like okay, yeah, it looks like cheating, but actually I can identify X, Y, Z that might have been going a little bit skew in your server here. But in terms of combating cheating at a kind of a actual cheating level, have we got any plans to develop and just have a closer look at what tools people are using to kind of get into that?
Yeah. So it's an interesting one because some of it is perception, right? Like for sure, like you say, like reliability of weapons or even the one hit of a blunderbuss getting killed by that. Some people don't even realise that can happen, right? And you're like, I just got one kill, that doesn't happen. But so there's some perception things about hit reg and some stuff, but ultimately kind of cheating in online games is an ongoing kind of battle for every single games developer out there, right? And we can't unfortunately go into the level of detail that we would like to, that we talk about all of the other kind of systems and things, because ultimately kind of revealing what you're doing reveals your hand to the nefarious types of people who are going out there and trying to kind of ruin the experience for others, which is ultimately what that is, right? And so like it is very rare in Sea of Thieves, like in potential comparison to kind of other kind of more combat focused experiences where there's probably more motivation to kind of go and work on cheats and have them in there because they're going to be more likely to be used. But we have a zero tolerance approach. Like every report we get, we go investigate. We have very good kind of reports and telemetry to kind of track this. So when we get videos sent through, we can go look and we can kind of identify if this stuff's happening. And anyone that does that gets the ban hammer, like and we go after that as kind of harshly as we can, right? Is ultimately the case. So basically, it's just that ongoing kind of battle, right? Isn't it? And it kind of like a war of attrition, for want of a better phrase. But so we're always looking at how to combat it, and if something new pops up, then we'll go figure out how to address it. But yeah, it is pretty rare ultimately in Sea of Thieves. Like that's all our data, all our reports, everything tells us like it's. But we know if it happens, it's frustrating, and we're always doing more, everything we can to kind of move that forward and ultimately win that battle. But it's one of the perils of online gaming, right? And it's rubbish for our players, right? And rubbish for everyone on our team that has to go spend their time fighting against that versus putting cool stuff in. Ultimately, that's just we would love to be doing nothing less than that, because it's just attrition, right? It's just time and effort spent on something when we could be doing better things for our players.
It's hard to conclusively win that battle, right? Because people are always adapting and trying new strategies. So it's just you've got to be on it all the time.
Yep.
So we've talked about kind of the current combat situation, but let's ask a difficult question. What's the future of combat for Sea of Thieves?
That's a great question. I think with everything that Drew was talking about, with first phase is let's stabilise the kind of foundations of the combat system. That's kind of their first phase. The second phase is let's take that fresh look at balancing, put everything back under the microscope, balance combat for the experience that Sea of Thieves is today. And then when it comes to the future of it, I think it's fair to say that there's an opportunity there to take just from the ground up a fresh look at what we want that personal combat experience to represent in Sea of Thieves. And I think the best way to think about this is, with the ambitious plans we've got for the future of Sea of Thieves, how we want to grow this experience and take feedback from our players and continue to use that to iterate upon the direction of the game. I think combat is an area where we are looking at the potential in the future to really look at a real ground-up overhaul of that system. And there's lots of things to bear in mind with that. I mean, if you think about combat in Sea of Thieves as it is today and as we first designed it, there's a lot of limitations. And again, we didn't make it easy for ourselves in terms of it's a first-person game. So first-person melee combat is challenging anyway in a network environment. But also the fact that we've got a set of principles around how we wanted to immerse our players. We don't want lots of cluttered UI on screen. We do everything in our power to get that UI off screen as fast as possible and make sure it's only contextual. When you think about, people constantly hear us wax lyrical about this is a pirate fantasy game. It's about living up to that pirate fantasy, and we've gone to town on delivering that across our mechanics and our quests, and we approached combat in the same way. You know, when you think about what it's like to fire a weapon, what it's like to swing a sword in a pirate world, there's a lightness to it. It's, you know, when you think about swashbuckling, it's not swinging a big heavy broadsword with huge delays and time. There's a lightness to that combat. So there's lots of principles that we have that I think, like, honestly, to make a better experience, maybe we need to compromise somewhere. Maybe we need to at least bend some of those rules as we look to combat for the future. But it is an area that we are seriously looking at, and it's a future thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I think totally. If we look at Sea of Thieves now, we have loads of plans for how we want to grow it and the things we can do to expand upon the game. But if we look at the existing experience and we look at ship combat and how kind of that really does meet those expectations for players, and we look across the whole experience, like, this personal combat, this player to player stuff is really like, we don't believe it lives up to that promise that the rest of the game kind of does ultimately, right? Yeah. It's the one bit where we're like, if we could magically do that bit again, like, for want of a better phrase, right? But and that's not to dampen down the incredible work that's gone into it and to kind of create what is there, because, like you say, super complex,
incredibly
right?
challenging area. What we're doing,
the challenge of like that sword play over a network is completely different to like a single player game that you can go play that has kind of that kind of combat, right? Because it's just, you've got so many different considerations, and tie that in, like you say, with the moving objects that you're on, the kind of real physical world with the gunplay. Like, it's super complex and a big undertaking. And so us looking at, okay, can we go do that again, right? And this is kind of future thinking, right? Future plans for us. Yeah. And so part of our ongoing strategy for Sea of Thieves is how we continue to work with co-dev partners and kind of new teams that kind of work and support Sea of Thieves. So we obviously have a big team at Rare, but as we've been growing and evolving Sea of Thieves, we've continued to grow and evolve our development team, right? Because the team has kind of grown bigger and bigger since launch, because we want to keep adding cool stuff and doing things. But so when it comes to this combat thing, we are like actively looking for potential co-dev partners that we can go partner with to kind of to do this, right? Because that seems like a really good kind of approach to us. Is there someone that maybe brings some external kind of experience or expertise in this kind of area? And so we're in the early stages of that, and just to kind of set expectations around timeframes on that, getting and onboarding a team is. That's a phase of getting someone on board that they can kind of, work with us. They're using our tools. They're kind of in our development rhythm. That's going to be 6 months, right? But then you're looking at a prototype phase, right? Of like, right, you provide the kind of the guidance, the direction of what that experience that we
rolling in everything that we've learned since launch.
Yeah, and you're looking at another 9 months to 12 months prototype phase, I think, for something as complex as that, right?
Yeah.
That you're going to go and so we can play it. It's not pretty. It's not kind of all fully visual and audio and stuff, but it's got all the key bits that we can go play in a networked environment and then be like, yes, this is the experience we want to go make. And it might be at that stage we go, you know what? Like, we've gone and tried it. We can't make the step forward that would justify the continued investment in this. Like any kind of feature, right, that you go after, right? Because the prototype is about proving it, right?
Well, fundamentally, we believe our players are not going to think this is a huge improvement over what we've had previously.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because it's different, it doesn't necessarily make it better, right? Yeah. So we'll get to that stage. We'll review, and then if we're good, and hopefully we will be, then, because like you say, we've learnt loads from everything that we've done so far, we'll then go and put that into full development, and then again you're looking at like another 12 months to go deliver that or something. So it's a meaningfully kind of long period of time to go and do something as complex as this. And I think in our internal discussions, it's almost like hearing us talk about it. It's like it's one of the most complex things we could go do, right? As a single kind of area or feature to go and add.
I think you talking about seeking, the right co-dev partner for this, I think that just speaks to the fact that it would require so much effort, so much commitment to really put that side of the game back under the spotlight and really try and live up to that fantasy and do it justice. It's not something we can do on the side. Mm-hmm. I think we need to scale our team and really commit to it. But I think the good thing I think that we can commit to is that it is such a part of that pirate fantasy. It's such a big part of Sea of Thieves that we want the chance to go and have a fresh look at it. And like Joe says, we might decide that we've given it all the time of day, we've prototyped it, but just those limitations we can't take to that next level. But we should still go and do that. We should go through that process, because we might find something that really elevates that side of the experience. And, future version of Sea of Thieves, we take that next step. But the commitment is to go and look at it.
Exactly, and we'll go into it with every hope and expectation that we can, and it will be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going investing and trying, right?
Yeah.
But you just have to have that kind of the reality lens. That
of course,
sadly,
of
we
course,
have to
and
advise
we're
sometimes.
eternal optimists. So I believe we can find something, but we've got to be realistic as well.
Yeah,
I think we strike gold. We could, couldn't we?
totally.
Good. We should start
That's
digging.
nice.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Striking
There we
gold,
go.
I like that.
Like it.
Here you go. I've got to learn how to do that without doing the mouth. There we go. It's fine. So that was really actually insightful. So thank you. That's really helpful. One of the other things, I'm not letting up, by the way, one of the other things that our community talked to us about quite a lot is the solo sloop experience. Obviously, we've been out for almost 4 years now in retail, and I think we've learned a lot about the solo slooping experience and, the challenges that some of those players face. And I think one of the things I'd love to bring to this table is actually discussing, what are those learns and how do we fold those learns in and design for the future for a solo sloop experience?
Yeah, I mean, don't want to dwell on the past too much, but in terms of the solo sloop experience and what it represented to us in those kind of early days of prototyping and then up to our launch in 2018, our focus with Sea of Thieves was players creating stories together, a group of players really feeling like they were working together as part of a crew on a ship. And fundamental to that is there's these immersive roles that you can do on a ship, and through using your communication and diplomacy and the teamwork amongst people, you're able to more effectively sail a ship. So, that making all of that hard work easier by working with other people. And I think that was a fundamental part of the design of the Galleon. At the same time, while we were designing the Galleon as that core Sea of Thieves experience where a crew worked together, of course we acknowledged that, not everybody's going to come to Sea of Thieves and have that ready-made group of friends. We spoke a lot about, we wanted this to be someone's first multiplayer game. We wanted to make a game that players would play and go, this has really changed my mind about the types of magical experience I can have in a multiplayer game. So we positioned the solo sloop as, this is the starting point for our players. This is, if your friends aren't online, you've always got the solo sloop to be able to play on. And if you play that way, we want to upsell the fact that there is a Galleon, and you might make friends in Sea of Thieves, and you'll be able to then play on that ship. So where that left us was, think about the way that chests work, the way that bailing works, the way that repairing the ship and sailing the ship, and all these interactive points on the ship. Solo was pretty much positioned as the hard mode of Sea of Thieves, which is interesting but kind of counterintuitive to what you'd expect as a player. And I think the landscape we released the game in and the content and the experiences you could have in 2018 was the hard mode. And to be fair, a lot of people do enjoy that part of Sea of Thieves. A lot of people appreciate it for that reason now. You've got to be the person who's sailing the ship. You've got to be the eyes on the horizon. You're almost spinning plates of, I've got to bail, I've got to repair the ship, I've got to sail the ship. But I think what we've learned since launch is that people perceive the sloop as that starting point, but they want to play that way forever, because that gives them more control over their experience. They want to experience all this diverse range of content that we've added to the game, like tall tales and world events, and there's so much more in the game now that players can experience as a solo player. So I think the way we think about that, we say the solo sloop, you can play on it with duos as well, and I think that's the point in terms of how it was balanced, right? It's still better with one other person. So how we think about that sloop has fundamentally changed, I think, in terms of, we see a lot of players since launch and to this day that play exclusively in that ship. And the backdrop against all of that is we've also added a lot to the game since launch. So we launched it as the hard mode, but we've added a lot of mechanics to the game. Revive, chain shots, lots of mechanics that we believe enhance that core Sea of Thieves experience, but it makes life for people who play on a solo sloop even harder. So I just want to acknowledge that. So there's lots of areas around the sloop whether that's how does it sit alongside the brigantine and the galleon in terms of that fundamental balance of what are they like into the wind, what are they like out of the wind, what are they like when they've got all their sails angled, down to how easy it is to board these ships and how all these mechanics interact with these ships. There's just so many areas of balance that we want to take a fresh look at. And again, without going into specifics, but that's something that we want to look at in terms of like a strike team, kind of dedicating time to looking at that, right?
We've got a couple of different options which we're exploring. To be fair, like it's kind of almost back to the same conversation we had around around the services work. Is how do we structure a team to not only just push on ahead and forge a path into these great new kind of exciting experiences, but also try and invest that time back into the core experience as it stands right now. We've talked about it in services and combat, but I think it's just a challenge for us as we operate our live service of going, we do have big goals and big aspirations to move forward, but we recognise that the solo crew experience is something that we want to go and address and just look at from a fresh balancing perspective. So there's a couple of different options there. There is the opportunity for us to go and pull out a strike team to just go and target a solo crew experience and see what improvements we could make there. Or there is an opportunity to take a different approach and potentially pull a larger feature team together and go and tackle this alongside some other things as part of one of our bigger like seasonal updates.
Yeah.
But I think the options there, we've got a lot of options available to us. It's another one of them prioritization and balancing challenges that we've got as we operate our live service, right?
Yeah, and it's always evolving, right? Like you say, the solo ship launched in one state, and then the game's evolved around it, and so things become higher priority. Or once we go tackle a thing like that, then something else will become the highest priority stuff. And so having that balance between how we continue to kind of iterate and improve on various things in the live service is the key. And that's why there is a kind of there is a challenge between, do you have this strike team thing that's just going and chopping off one of those things at a time, or do we go, actually, you know what, we're going to go after a few of these bigger things that really impact the experience, that isn't necessarily a new thing to headline a season, but it might be that we're going to go and make a season all about these things, right? And so
to give it that commitment.
Yeah. And so we're having those conversations right now, right? Like last week we were in front of the virtual whiteboard and kind of moving things around and looking at that shape, looking at that thing. And the great thing about Sea of Thieves is that we've got so many ideas about new stuff we could do. There's so many things we can go tackle within the experience like this. It's such a rich, broad thing. Like that's almost our biggest challenge, right? Is the prioritization and the kind of and the team shape and order to do that, because we can't just focus on new. We can't just focus on existing. You've got to have that constant balance.
And there's so many different facets to it. There's what that ship represents and what your experience is like as a solo player sailing on that ship. So there's almost the solidifying that ship's place in the game and looking at the balance. But then there's also the kind of stuff we've always talked about, which is we still want players to have a variety of experiences when they encounter other players in the game. And there's ways that solo players can make those connections in a more meaningful way. And I think right now, the way that works in Sea of Thieves is you sail with someone within a session, and you've got the option to effectively, I can add you as a friend, and that it's essentially, that's the only way to make that connection. So looking to the future of Sea of Thieves, there's just acknowledgement of there's the ship itself and what that experience represents, but how can we also, for players that are open to it, allow solo players to make those connections more effectively with other people. So that was kind of a Sea of Tease, but got to be careful.
No, I love that. And I think one of the reasons I love Season 5 so much is I do tend to solo sleep quite a lot. And like you say, there's that add the friend, but I think for me that added a little bit more dialogue with other players. Even though I was playing on my own, it was like, here's a quest. I see a ship on the horizon, have a firework. And that's the kind of thing that that's literally how I play. I'm like, I see you. I'm like, white flag, straight up the flag goes. But it does allow that kind of like, I know I can't even think of the right phrase, but almost like a micro interaction. Yeah. It's like, here's an acknowledgement, and then you start to build on that. So I really love the way that we're thinking about it, because Season 5, resonated really well with our players. It certainly for me as a solo sleeper did. So it's really nice to, hear that from, I don't want to call you the horse, but the horse's mouth.
I'll take it. Pedigree horse.
A Grand National winner.
Thank you. Some of our players are lucky enough to have those magical experiences where they enter the game solo and they make friends, and then people have made incredible connections in Sea of Thieves. We've seen weddings happen in Sea of Thieves and people have met this way, and it's unbelievable that a game can support those experiences. But it's just about how can we make that more likely to happen for a broader group of people. And I think that's a commitment alongside just assessing, well, frankly, all of our ships and how they sit alongside each other in terms of that core balance.
That's really interesting.
The phrase micro connection, is that what you used, by the way? Micro
interaction.
Yeah, that was great.
Micro interaction.
I get that. Not a microaggression, it's like a micro friendship, isn't it? It's like a micro positive thing.
Not a mic interaction.
Yeah, you know when you like start at like a new job and you're like, you make a connection with someone across the meet and you're like, you think like me, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be friends.
Yeah,
and then
totally.
you build on that. You're like, little email here and here, like little Teams message.
That's
and then, before you know it, best buds.
There you
That's
go.
the kind of equivalent for Sea of Thieves. I feel that
That's the
fireworks
fireworks.
offers. That's kind of like your entry level.
This is what I'm all
I
about.
see you. Yeah, exactly.
So we should equip everyone at Rare with safe fireworks to use for that scenario. Little ones, party poppers maybe.
For the corridors.
Just be like, just like walk past someone.
Welcome to Rare.
You were going with that then. I liked it.
I didn't know where I was going. I
was
just
good.
ended up from somewhere. Yeah.
So just to touch on something that you said there, if you're solo slooping, you're bailing, you're patching your ship, you are steering, you're sailing,
Spinning plates.
you're spinning many
You might be
plates,
smashing them.
And one of the things we've seen as kind of a negative player kind of interaction is things like spawn camping, especially when you're a solo sleeper. If you're being spawn camped, it's very tough for you to kind of maintain a kind of positive experience without kind of scuttling or something. So that's something, as I've said, we see come up time and time again, spawn camping, etc. So wanted to talk a little bit about that, and are there any designs or ideas in the kind of the fire to address things like spawn camping?
I mean, it's a. Do you want to say something?
I was just going to say...
Can the horse speak? No, you go.
I was just going to say,
say
it's very much on that list when we look at core experience, like challenges as we're facing right now, and solo crew balancing, the spawn camping. While it clearly impacts the solo crew experience, it can impact galleons as well and for player crews. So it's very much in that mix of how do we balance the new and the exciting stuff, but also try and address that. But do you want to talk a bit more about it?
I think it's that whole subject of what does the timeline of a ship encounter and how does it play out? And I think what effectively happening is it is a deficiency of the experience, and let's be absolutely honest, in terms of players get into that ship combat experience, and by how all these mechanics work together, there's a time for a ship to sink and a fill rate of the ship based on the amount of holes it's got, and that's all part of the fundamental balance of a ship. So the spawn camping arises through players wanting to guarantee that ship goes down. So essentially players ending up camping on that ship to prevent people from bailing. And it's a big result of the freedom that we give players and how these mechanics work in our shared world. So it's something that we are aware of. We've been aware of it for some time. There's multiple ideas, both past and present, around how we solve that. Our solution for launch was the scuttle mechanic, which is less than ideal because it requires players to find that option in the menu, and it feels very destructive from their point of view. I know we see players using scuttle in a funny way at the end of sessions, but I think for that core scenario where a ship is going down, it's about, if you think of a boxing match, what's happening is the referee is not stepping in and parting those players. I mean, that's the way I think about it. And that's right. Like, you've got the encounter is over between two ships, but the game isn't stepping in and separating those players and bringing that encounter to a thrilling conclusion, ideally. We want to make it feel really exciting. So you've just got this weird no man's land of people fighting each other, just waiting for that ship to sink. And it's very unlikely in most cases that the players on the receiving end are going to pull back that issue. So that's really part of the design where we see it happen on streams, it's just like, oh God, like there's a key part of the experience missing there. And without kind of teasing where we'll go with it, there's a bunch of ideas that not exactly like combat, but it's such a core change to the way you relate to other ships that it's something that we need to spend a lot of time on, getting inside us and methodically kind of step through it. But it is an area that we are committed to addressing.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because it's like your boxing analogy is a great one, by the way. But because the players that are doing the attacking, it's kind of their only option, right? And they don't really have a choice, but they're not necessarily like wanting to do it or enjoying it. But whereas for the player on the other end, their anger's directed at the player, right?
Yeah.
As much as anything, but it kind of it's at the mechanic and the flow sort of thing, right? It's like, and to your point, it's like if a boxer's winning, sometimes you see them look at the ref and be like, "Come on!" Like, I'm not gonna, that's them looking at us going, "Come on!"
Because it's not fair to keep hitting them because the encounter is over.
Exactly, right? And so that is absolutely on us, but it plays out in a way that creates kind of real tension between players in our game. Like I know, like joking about the metaphor, but it's a really serious kind of thing because it creates real negative experiences.
Emotions run high. There's frustration that leads to probably things that are said that shouldn't be said. That really it's part of the experience where the game needs to step in more, whether that's with a mechanic or just a change to how that ship flow works. But yeah, it is one of the things that you do see when you watch streams of Sea of Thieves or when you play the game that we are committed to addressing.
I mean, we've been thinking about it for quite some time as well, because Drew, even when I started working at Rare, I think there was something exploring this idea in Insiders once upon a time. So it's not a new thing that's emerged because we've got, over 25 million players and people play differently. It is very much actually this has always been something that we've been quietly thinking about in the background. But I think, as you said, I think that we've just got to kind of understand, actually, this is the intent, this is the cycle. People aren't intentionally spawn camping, they just want to see a ship sink because we've put an emissary system in there that requires that they collect that flag when that ship sinks.
Yeah, totally.
This is it.
So assuming the best of intent from our players to just want to play the game, there's something to address there. And obviously there are people who sometimes don't have good intent either, and it's actually, as you say, how do we make the game step in and make this fairer? Because I think we can acknowledge that most of our players are absolutely amazing people, but there might be people who've had a bad day and feel like, I'm going to make your life difficult today.
Completely, yeah. And that entire encounter ends up being more long drawn out than ideally it should be because it's already effectively been decided at that point. And we want, like, it's part of Sea of Thieves, right? If you want to get loot that way and take that chance of engaging ships in combat, that is a core part of Sea of Thieves. So that is one of the deficiencies that kind of affect the perception of that we need to address.
Great. Any last words? Any last words on spawn camping?
No. I think
Incredible.
I think what I would just say is, and kind of, me awkwardly alluding to kind of we've got ideas, and we do, but I think a lot of the kind of solutions that we've had to spawn camping, that they're big changes to the ship and how we bring those encounters to a close. And I think what we want to do is find out, well, how do we test it in the simplest way? How do we get something to Insiders where we can really assess that balance? Because I think that's going to be key. Because wherever we end up, it's really going to change the perception and the feel of how ships almost relate to each other in this shared world. So it's just finding the solution or the way we carve up that solution to get testing on it early. And I think that's where we're at. We've got some hypotheses that we just need to kind of run through and then get into production.
Yeah, and we've tried a couple of different solutions, and I won't go into what they are, but like the one that you were alluding to, there's one more recently that we kind of tried leading into season 5, and it was just like, oh, hold on, this isn't going to work. And there was because of the complexity of how it interacts with everything and the whole kind of shared experience. So it's like, it's not as simple as whatever you're thinking, unless you are thinking of the best thing.
Then we'll do it. I think spawn camping and solo crew balance are so closely interlinked as well. And when we talk about just the balance and the interplay between ships, I think both of those topics, while they are separate and can affect different crew sizes, we've got to really look at them almost together and make sure that we aren't just making balancing changes to accommodate smaller crews, but then push it skewed into potentially more spawn camping scenarios or vice versa. It's a really, really challenging area for us to go tackle.
And, we've spent quite a lot of time behind the scenes, even talking kind of podcast topic wise, like when are we going to tackle this? And it really is actually, especially, with hit registration, we've got things on the horizon, but here we don't really have necessarily a clear plan. There's definitely an intent and an understanding of some of the pains that our players have. But I think for me, it's really important we discuss this just really transparently, because it's like, we're aware, we've been listening to you, we understand your frustrations, and we are thinking about them. It's going to take time to get to a place where we're going to evolve that experience to make it better for everyone involved.
I think we just want to be considered as well, right? There's lots of things that we can go do, but these are really gnarly areas and with just meta changes that could come out the back of it. So just being really careful and being really considered about how we approach that, and almost keep our cards close to our chest and really do the due diligence internally that we've tested potential opportunities before we even move into Insiders and get their feedback. Like, I think we just need to be really measured with those ones.
Yeah. And I think the main thing for our community to know is that we have ambitious plans for the future. We want to do completely new things in Sea of Thieves, but it's very much one eye on the future, but also one eye on the now and the state of our game now, and what are the key issues that we need to address. And we've covered kind of the top ones today. But yeah, that commitment to make the Sea of Thieves experience today better, more robust, more reliable, and more welcoming for people.
So how do we all feel about that? How do we feel about the last, for us, it's been 2 hours or so where we've just gone into all the things that we have been quietly kind of noodling on as we bring all this new content into the product, Does it feel strange to just get a load of stuff off your chest, or good? Cleansing?
That was good. It's good. It's good to... I think it's just... There's some things we're making progress on, and it's just acknowledging that, plans in place for putting teams on it and addressing these issues. I think acknowledging it is just as important, and seeing that we're aware of the issues.
I think that's it for me. We see it on Reddit, we see it on Twitter, and I think when we see it as a team, we instinctively go, yeah, we know that's not good enough. We know we need to go and move on those things, and the challenge is how we go and tackle it. But I think it's been great just to be able to talk openly about some of the challenges that we're facing, and almost just what are the conversations we're having in the studio at the moment about how to build a team, how to restructure to focus on live service, but also go and deliver the new and exciting things. So I think, it's good to be able to air it, and so players can see that this is an active conversation across the team.
Yeah, using the podcast, having that closer link to our community, which has been challenging, right? With working from home and everything we've lived through, and that we've done we tried to do as best as we can to keep that communication going. But part of that communication is it's not just the new, exciting, shiny stuff. It's also what are the things that are of top concern to our community.
Yeah.
So it's been good.
Ever since we lost, or stopped doing the weekly updates, right? Because ultimately I was filling quite a bit because trying to talk about stuff in detail every week. But just for me personally, it felt like I've lost a little bit that connection, right? And a little bit that kind of platform to do this. And we've had the podcast series and things, but to be able to dedicate and in like you say, a quite lengthy period of time to talk about this is actually great, and that open, transparent kind of nature that we've kind of always kind of preached on Sea of Thieves throughout. I think it stands us in good stead, right? And being able to acknowledge that we don't yet have all the solutions, all the answers, and all the things on some of those things, but we are they're important, and we know we need to go adjust them. I think it's a good thing. So I hope everybody kind of listens and kind of will have a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, I'm sure. But that's great. We're always listening, always scouring, and
Genuinely all is.
Yeah.
As long as you say it nicely,
Yeah.
not don't be mean to us.
Yeah.
But as long as you're saying it in a constructive way that it will resonate with someone in the team.
Yep.
We're all massively passionate. It's not just a community team who scour everything. It's everyone. Sometimes to our detriment. It's we can't look away. But everything, Joel, true. How many late nights have you had?
But honestly,
I can't stop.
But that's
it's
what
true.
you want. That's what you want. That's exactly what. I'm proud of that. That. Everybody on the team is scaring and seeing. It doesn't mean they're commenting on it, but they're taking it in, and it's being fed into the decisions that we make. Because that's the commitment that we made to our players when we launched this game. That we're going to continue to evolve the game with our community.
Yeah. Cool. So that was pretty intense, but that was really nice because it's the first podcast I've actually done from the Tavern. All the podcasts I've been on historically have been from home with the cat trying to break the door down to get in. So it's really nice to see your faces again. It's been really good, and I think it's actually really great to have conversations of this nature just around a table. So if you enjoyed that, we did too. It was lovely. For future podcasts, obviously we take questions. Please use #SOTPodcast if you'd like to ask something for next time round. But for now, we'd like to say thank you for joining us. We know it's been intense, so if you've reached this point, thanks for staying with us, and we'll see you next time. Or as Joe says, see you on the seas.
Or as Mike says, see you on the waves.
Yeah, doesn't quite
Doesn't
roll.
really
with
work,
it,
does it? But,
I don't know which one to go with. That's see you on the
No, the better one.
see you on the seas.
Community decides.
Do you want to do a little wave now? Do you want to do a little wave? Which
This
camera?
one?
Yeah.
To the big one.
This one.
Yeah. Or do we just...
We're all together. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you just saw and want to stay up to date with all the latest Sea of Thieves news, then hit subscribe and click that little ship's bell for all those notifications. Cheers.